Hey again everybody, it's Robert184, 2Rs2Bs from gundam.tk and YouTube, and it's Sunday night, and that means Gundam Age, the second episode of the new series, has just aired. So anyway, here's going to be some of my subjective thoughts as I walk you through that, with some comparisons to old Gundam series, but anyway, this is just my opinion, so don't forget to let me know what you think with a comment down below. The cold open kicks things off with a bang literally, as you have the enemies pointing a massive missile at Nora the colony, and then that exploding, which is what we saw at the end of episode 1. And then you've got the reaction of all the commanders and the mayor, or whatever you want to call him, along with the Jamil Neat, or bright clone sitting inside. And the captain's trying to convince them, hey, we can use the Diva, and we can use the Gundam, and we can counterattack the UE finally. And after that, it's time to get into the voiceover. And when I reviewed this here, the Age 1 normal, I read it off the side of the box, so you can go see that there. But basically, it's sort of cool that you're going to get the story synopsis for those people that missed episode 1. And after that, there's a really good transition from the voiceover to the opening transition, and all of a sudden, the power of Age begins. There are some plot details that I'm just going to be talking about here, but the basic crux of the story is, hey, let's pull the core out. We're going to have to evacuate everybody. We've got just enough hours to do that. Everybody down to the center, and we're going to pull the middle out, which makes for a pretty cool graphic and idea. And then we get to see some of the hardware actually moving the Genoas, and the machines, plus the Gundams, they have to get moved to the ship, and this machine is going to end up playing a rather large role, despite the fact that it looks like a little cheesy egg. And all of a sudden the Gundam Age is going to be armed with a beam spray gun, yes, not this one that's coming around, the Dodge rifle, and a shield, and most importantly, it's going to have its spoilers on, though they don't seem to talk about it that much. So how does it spend the rest of the episode? Walking to the ship. Now, when you're used to seeing all sorts of crazy things like what Exia and 00, especially in Transam mode, can do, seeing the Gundam walk very, very slowly towards the ship doesn't come across as being very exciting. However, it does allow the plot to progress as he's going to meet people on the way. The focus shifts then to Emily and Flit's goofball friend. I don't really know his name and don't really care to know at the moment. And it seems a little bit annoying that, yes, these kids decide we're not going to follow the evacuation order, which we've seen before with Amuro in episode 1 way back in the day, and they decide they're going to head to the same ship that Flit's heading towards. Now, this actually just seemed a little bit annoying at first, but in the end it allows for the plot development, because they're going to meet the captain of the ship, or the should-be captain, and his cronies. And then, in a whispered conversation in a dark room, they overhear that they are not going to do what they should be doing, which is save the colony's people from the inside, and instead they're going to do their own thing, which gives us a chance to show Captain Grudek, or soon-to-be Captain Grudek, just how badass he can be. Before the commercial, we get to see another classic Gundam trope, the old man sacrifice, as he gets ready to stay behind as they all head off to save the colony and probably everybody. And then the Diva gets a very nice intro as the kids head onto the ship, which again seems unrealistic until I remember that Emily Vargas is her grandfather, so him seeing them on the ship, he's probably going to keep them around and not kick them off like, say, a proper military officer would have done, which they did try to do. And then they are going to reveal the bridge, and all the seats. It's the same thing when you see a Gundam show. The people are sitting exactly where they should be. I really like the controllers, or whatever you call them, sitting behind the captain. I think that's great. And Grudek, who ended up tasing the captain's goons, and then taking over the ship, does some crew data shenanigans, which allows them to think the crew from inside the colony are now going to be the crew of the ship, which we all should have seen coming a mile away. But it really allows a chance for Malaise. I don't know how to pronounce her name yet, but she comes across as the Saiyan, and wearing pink certainly helps. But she's certainly going to be that older sister, I think, for Flit, and it comes across, she's wondering why the bad guys are doing what they're doing. Why don't they just blow up the power generator? Why are they giving them 6 hours to evacuate the colony? But she ends up taking charge and then accepting Grudek's orders, sometimes reluctantly when she doesn't agree with it. But I think she's going to play a really positive role for the rest of the series. After we cut back to the Gundam, which seems like it got forgotten for a while as they were talking about everybody else, we realize that, yes, he's met a new friend, and I'm going to call her Tifa, although her real name's Yuri. And she ends up having all sorts of premonitions, which are going to be very, very useful for getting the Gundam Age 1 outside the colony, because as it's led down these dark hallways underneath in the superstructure after getting blasted down below, basically she says, this is where you want to be, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, kaboom, and the Gundam is outside, right in line to bump into a bad guy and then end up fighting it, except for the fact that yes, the beam spray gun that he was given earlier in the episode is useless, so what is he going to do when he has an ineffective beam weapon? And that's where the kid aspect starts to kick in a little bit. The age system here, they've got the age builder. It's a giant egg which has been brought into the Diva, and it can make whatever is needed based on the advancement and what the age one has learned and things like that. And it comes across as being ridiculous. So they manufacture the Dodds rifle in about 3 seconds with some admittedly very cool graphics, and they get shot out into space where the H1 grabs it and then blows up the bad guy. And I said, yeah, that's cheesy. And then I remembered the impulse and the strike packs, and you really don't want to question these things too much because then they all come across as being ridiculous. Finally, for the synopsis, everybody on the crew is happy despite the fact that they tried to leave the Gundam behind, because the Gundam saved the day and will obviously reunite with them in the next episode. And all of a sudden, what's the shock going into next week? Last week we had an explosion, and there's an unidentified, does that make sense, UE coming at them, and he seems to be coming about 3 times as fast as anybody else, and he's red. And well, I lied about both of those parts. But obviously we're going to have somebody who matters in terms of the battle. When you go back and watch the opening, he's going to be a big bad for at least the next little while, and this guy's going to have to take care of him somehow. Overall, I guess I have to say that the Gundam this episode did exactly what it has to do in terms of advancing the plot, introducing the other characters. Grudek, I made the joke about him being Setsuna last week, has a much bigger role to play, and I'm very curious to see what his agenda is, but it seems to be all above board. And this takes us back to the Gundam ship as the Rebels. We've seen it in Seed, and we've seen it a bunch of other times, but when the Federation comes across as being corrupt and bad, I think that adds a lot more to the intrigue of Gundam, and it makes us wonder whether the UEs are really going to be so bad in comparison once we find out what their real motives are. So Grudek and Milei's really come across as being the most interesting characters. Emily's headstrong, obviously, which we've seen the goofball just sort of tags along. But outside of that, the most intriguing character is going to be Tifa. And if she has the power to predict the future, and whether it's going to be new type or whichever Gundamish term they want to use coming up, it's just going to be curious to see if anybody else develops that, or is that something we're going to have to wait to see in the second generation, or will Flit also be getting the classic new type Flash before he decides to cut into 25 bad guys and know exactly where they are? So the show seems to be moving along, so what do you think? After watching the first episode, I have to say that I had low expectations going in and have far exceeded them. Episode 2 comes across as being a much more grounded show, just in terms of it has certain things that it has to set up, and it did that. Because of that, we don't really get a lot of Flit, and we don't get very much of the Gundam, although I have to say it was drawn better. And I do look forward to it uniting with the crew of the Diva and where they're going to go and see what they do in the future. Episode 3 coming up, we're going to have a bad guy showdown, so why don't you let me know what you think looking ahead to that. So that'll wrap up my look at episode 2, but again, please let me know what you think down below. If you like the video or the review, why don't you let me know with a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Comments, good and bad, are of course always welcome, and I always like to hear from you, so that's the best place. It's always fun to read through and see what people have to say, good and bad, about the show or this video itself. Anyway, stay tuned for lots more reviews, and I'll keep going with these age anime looks, and stay tuned for next week. See you then. Bye, everybody. So you've got a race car spoiler on your back, and you spent the whole episode walking.